Hello, my name's Jasper, you're watching Buckle Up, and this is a 2019 Suzuki Vitara. I know it's got a 2013 plate, but it's a private plate. Anyway, let's have a look around it. Starting with the styling at the front of the Vitara, you can see that it's quite bold and strong styling that really kind of mimics a proper off-roader. You've got a really strong bit of styling here where the lights taper into this grille with the chrome on it, and you've also got a lot of black plastic at the front. It's quite a bold and distinctive design, definitely reminiscent of some off-roaders. Continuing on to the side of the Vitara, you can still see elements of proper off-roaders in its styling. You've got a really high bonnet line, and that window line continues all the way back to the rear of the car. You've got chunky-ish cladding around the wheel arches, and you've got a plastic cladding as the lower trim all the way between the wheels. You've got roof rails and a real separation between the body colour and this black metallic paint on the roof line and B pillars and C pillars and D pillars, and you've also got that black paintwork on the mirror caps as well. Interestingly, the alloy wheels are colour matched to the bodywork on this model. I don't know if that means if you get a blue Vitara you can also get blue alloy wheels, but I'm not quite sure how I feel about this. However, I do like the design of the alloy wheels because they do look very utilitarian, which kind of fits in with the rest of the styling you have on this vehicle. And finally, onto the back of the Vitara, where you can again see the continuation of chunky kind of off-road styling elements, with the cladding down here being quite similar to a lot of other off-roaders. You've got completely red plastic light clusters at the rear here, and your reverse lights are actually down here, which is a bit of a separation from a lot of conventional styling. I'm not sure how I feel about the rear three quarters of this car. I find it a little bit funky looking, but not necessarily in a good way. However, let's have a look in the boot, because this is a positive of the Vitara and it's locked. Things I am keen about include the boot, because it's fantastically large and flat. Harry will like this because it's got a completely flat load bay, but does also have storage underneath the boot floor. And additionally, you've got a latching boot floor, so it will hold its position, meaning it's really easy to get stuff in and out of that cubby hole. You've got large bins at either side here, and you've got a 12-volt socket and a carrier bag hook over on this side. There's two tie downs, one at either side, and you've got ISOFIX mounting points on all of those seats. Let's have a look inside. These gas struts are good. In the back seats of the Vitara, you'll find a surprising amount of space, especially if you're a little bit younger or a little bit smaller. There really is a tremendous amount of knee room, and something we did discover earlier is even if somebody really tall is in the front seats, you still have knee room in the back. Even in the furthest back position of the front seat, it's been designed so there is still actually space for somebody with legs to sit back here. Headroom is pretty good as well. I know my gangliest colleague didn't really find an issue with headroom when sitting upright, which is really good to see because it's quite a boxy design, so you've got a very high ceiling all the way back on the interior of the car. Feature-wise, there isn't a great deal to speak of back here. There's absolutely nothing on this centre console, and on the door card you've literally only got a little tiny cubby here used for closing the door, and space for a large water bottle down here. You can fit 3 people in the rear seats, however the centre seat is one of those seat belts that's kept in the ceiling, double clip, one either side of you jobs, so not overly convenient if you regularly want to carry 3 people. However, not the end of the world. In a pinch, you'll be fine. The one thing I do have to whinge about the seats back here is that the backrest is incredibly upright. There's no kind of ability to alter the angle back here, so you do feel like you're sitting quite, not bolt upright, but, you know, I prefer to be leaning a little bit further back just for a little bit more comfort. You do have a seat pocket in the back of the passenger seat, but there is not one on the back of the driver's seat. Let's see if there's some more features up front. So, in the front of the Vitara, you'll find quite a large array of relatively cheap feeling plastics. Certainly the door cards are very nice and tactile, as is the centre of the dash, the plastic above the glove box itself, and pretty much everywhere is a little bit cheap feeling. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the price point that this car starts at, even you know, in 2022, as costs of everything are going up, £22,000 isn't too bad for the size of car and the functionality you are able to get. You've got a nice feeling steering wheel. There is leather or fake leather wrapped around that. The gear knob does feel reasonable as well. The plastic on the handbrake is soft touch, and you've got a soft pad on the armrest on the door card, and also you've got fake leather on the center console armrest. Practicality wise, you've got a deep bin in the center console armrest. You've got two cup holders here. You've got a really good sized cubby holder here for, say, a phone. You've got a 12-volt socket and a USB input. You've got a really good sized glove box, full width, no fuse box in here. Could do with a little bit more height in it, but depth wise it's fantastic. Certainly enough space for the really chunky owner's manual. That is beefy, that. And then in the door cards, you've got a large bottle holder at the front, coupled with space for, say, an umbrella. So the door cards themselves do hold a reasonable amount of stuff. One interesting thing, you have a clock in the center of the dashboard, which is really kind of 90s SUV, almost. I mean, it's very much not a luxury car clock, it is very kind of 90s. Speaking of things that aren't from the 90s, however, you've got a infotainment screen which has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, both wired, but the infotainment system itself is a little bit dated. However, if you've got the ability to plug a smartphone in, realistically, we will all do that as the preference anyway. And as far as functionality goes, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto load really quickly, and the display is responsive when you're using them. The gauge cluster is a little bit kind of cheap looking. You've got kind of chrome plastic surrounding the gauges, and that's a kind of underlying theme on the interior of this car. You've got enough of everything, but everything does feel a little bit cheap. However, that's not really a bad thing for the functionality you are getting. Let's go for a drive in the Suzuki Vitara. And before we set off, buckle up. Now, the engine in this particular Vitara is a 1.4 turbocharged petrol unit with 4 cylinders, and it produces around 138 brake horsepower and 220 newton meters of torque, both of which are relatively respectable numbers for the capacity and type of engine that it is. And certainly when driving the Vitara, you don't really feel like you're lacking in power. The 220 newton meters of torque is delivered relatively strongly from about 2000 RPM, so you can feel that once you put your foot down as you start pulling away. The engine certainly feels like it's got enough poke to move the size of car you're in. And actually, the Vitara is, while you're sitting up very high, it's not too large a car. It's quite narrow and it's not a very long wheelbase either. So those things coupled together mean that actually threading this through smaller gaps in traffic and round urban streets is actually very achievable. You do have the benefits of that high driving position, which mean you've got excellent visibility to the front and to the sides. The rear is a little bit smaller than I was hoping, especially with the rear headrests up. You are limited on visibility back there. The driving experience itself is relatively good. The gearbox is quite notchy, but the ratios are well thought out, and the experience, once you're used to getting the gear stick kind of latched into place, you can drive this really smoothly. One thing I would say is that overall, everything that this car has going for it does stack up to mean that it's quite a smooth, easy to live with driving experience. You've got enough power, you've got a pretty good manual gearbox, the clutch is nice and it's not too light, but it's got a very linear action. The brakes are good and the throttle response is pretty sharp too. Economy-wise, you'll probably see somewhere in the high 30s to low 40s in the real world, depending on the mixture of driving you're doing. If you're doing more urban driving, you'll obviously see lower fuel economy. If you're doing more extra urban driving, you'll begin to kind of creep that average fuel economy up. So for the size of car, the fuel economy is pretty good. The wing mirrors are fantastic, they're really large and you've got an excellent view behind you. They're also heated, which is handy for winter mornings. The parts of the interior you touch when you're driving or in daily use are adequate quality. The infotainment system, when you've got your phone plugged into it, is excellent, and you've got fully automatic climate controls, and yeah, you've got enough creature comforts that actually you've got a relatively good range of features in this car. So I've got stereo mounted audio controls, I've got voice recognition, which is pretty rubbish admittedly. I've also got cruise control and manual headlights and wipers. Unfortunately, no auto, although I bet you can get that on a higher trim level of car. Electrically adjustable wing mirrors, and the climate vents are so simple. It's refreshing to see something that's really easy to adjust. If you want to move or rotate the airflow, you literally just rotate the whole vent. To close off the airflow, you just close the vent. There's no kind of dial to adjust. It's literally just pushing stuff, which makes it really simple to get on with. Everything in this car is really simple. It's a kind of back to basics approach to motoring, and really I can't fault it for that. It's very reminiscent of proper off-roaders, and actually on the subject of off-roading, you can get the Vitara with all-wheel drive, and it's actually relatively competent off-road for a kind of soft roader, which is the class of car that this is. Steering wise, the car is okay. It's a little bit numb. There's not much feedback at all, and I think a lot of that is down to how electrically assisted the power steering is, but also I do get the impression that there's quite a bit of slop in the steering mechanism, so you can turn the wheel and not really feel a lot's happening. And another thing I must say about this driving experience is it's actually incredibly quiet. There's not much road noise coming through at all. At higher speeds you do get a little bit of wing noise from the A-pillars and wing mirrors. However, there's really not much noise that comes through to the cabin at all. It really does isolate you incredibly well from your surroundings. The suspension is a little bit firm for urban driving, especially at lower speeds. You really kind of find yourself bouncing around a little bit. However, once you're going a little bit faster, I've found it kind of settles down, which is at least It's actually a really refined driving experience, especially given the price point that the Vitara sits at. I am impressed with how well this drives. It feels pretty competent. I know you'd be able to take this off-road if you really wanted to, you know, just if you've got a couple of fields to drive across. It's not a hardcore off-roader by any stretch. However, it's got enough functionality and ability that if you really needed to, you'd be able to get across a muddy field or two in a pinch. If you've got the all-wheel drive model, that is. Driving experience on roads, you know, pretty good overall, refined enough. The engine certainly is one of the stronger points, I'd say. Certainly feels like you've got enough power. Does 0 to 60 in about 9.5 seconds. So actually that's not too much of a slouch either. Don't get me wrong, I don't think you'll be able to have a tremendous amount of fun in this. However, you'll certainly be able to get where you're going and get there in relatively good comfort, and while not consuming too much fuel. So that is the Suzuki Vitara. All in all, actually pretty good. Driving experience a little bit numb, but the practicality and styling and features you get, especially at this price point, really do make it quite a good buy. You'll be hard pressed to find something as spacious as this on the inside in the same class that this sits in. So that's everything. Thank you very much for watching Buckle Up. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, check out some of our other content. All of our social medias are linked in the description below, and you can also find links down there to our Patreon or to our merch store. Or if you'd like to support us here directly on YouTube, you can also become a channel member. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Are we not going to address trousers in the video?
No, because it's not the first video I've worn these trousers in.
But I feel like we should mention the trousers.
I feel like we should mention your disgusting short. With the cladding down here really kind of being a bit of a raised bit of bodywork that does look similar to a lot of off-road or FUVs. I did this last time. I'm calling these off-road roof bars. They're just roof bars. Yeah. Do you think I can make the alarm go off?